Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. Tonight we're settling in with some stories that will keep you company as you drift off to sleep. These are tales about betrayal, broken trust, and the complicated relationships we share with the people closest to us. Stories that make you think about family, love, and what happens when the people we trust most become strangers. So grab your favourite pillow, get comfortable, and let's explore these moments that changed everything for the people who lived them. Our first story comes from someone who discovered that sometimes the person sleeping next to you is living a completely different life. I'm 32 years old, and I thought I had a pretty good handle on my marriage. My husband Jake and I had been together for 8 years, married for 5 of those. We met in college, dated through our 20s, and built what I thought was a solid partnership. We had our routines, our inside jokes, the kind of comfortable rhythm that comes from really knowing someone. Or at least, that's what I believed. Jake worked in finance, and I'm a teacher at the local middle school. Our schedules were different, but they worked. He'd leave early for the office, and I'd head out around 7:30. We'd have dinner together most nights, watch our shows, talk about our days. Nothing felt wrong. Nothing felt off. That's the strange part about betrayal sometimes. It doesn't announce itself with dramatic music or obvious red flags. It just exists quietly in the background while you go about your normal life, completely unaware. The discovery happened on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I remember because the leaves were just starting to turn, and I'd spent the morning teaching my students about metaphors. Life has a way of being ironic like that. I came home early because our school had a teacher development day that got cancelled at the last minute. I texted Jake to let him know, but he didn't respond, which wasn't unusual. He often got caught up in meetings. I pulled into our driveway around 2 in the afternoon and noticed my sister Emily's car parked down the street. Emily lived about 20 minutes away and worked from home as a graphic designer. We were close, talked almost every day, saw each other at least once a week for coffee or lunch. She was my best friend, the person I told everything to. Seeing her car made me smile. I thought maybe she'd stopped by to surprise me or needed to borrow something. I walked into the house and called out hello. No response. The living room was empty, everything in its usual place. I set my bag down on the kitchen counter, and that's when I heard it. Voices coming from upstairs. Laughter. My husband's laugh and my sister's voice muffled through the bedroom door. For a split second, my brain tried to make it innocent. Maybe Emily had stopped by to drop something off. Maybe Jake had come home sick, and she was keeping him company. The mind does that, tries to protect you from the truth, even when it's obvious. I walked up the stairs slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. The bedroom door was closed but not locked. I stood outside for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. Part of me wanted to turn around, go back downstairs, pretend I'd never come home early. But I couldn't. I opened the door and there they were, my husband and my sister in my bed, in a situation that left absolutely no room for misinterpretation. The moment they saw me, everything froze. Emily's face went white. Jake sat up and started trying to say my name, but nothing came out that made any sense. I didn't scream or cry or throw things. I just stood there, feeling like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. This couldn't be happening to me. These were the 2 people I trusted most in the entire world. The 2 people who were supposed to love me, protect me, be on my side, no matter what. I turned around and walked back downstairs. I heard them scrambling behind me, heard Emily calling my name, heard Jake saying, "Wait, we need to talk." But I kept walking. I grabbed my keys and my bag and left the house. I drove to a coffee shop across town and sat in my car in the parking lot for 2 hours, staring at nothing, trying to process what I'd just seen. The phone calls started almost immediately. Jake called 17 times in the first hour. Emily called 12 times. I didn't answer any of them. I couldn't. What was there to say? What explanation could possibly make sense? Eventually I turned my phone off and just sat there in the silence, watching people walk in and out of the coffee shop, living their normal lives, unaware that mine had just imploded. When I finally went back home that evening, Jake was there alone, sitting on the couch with his head in his hands. He stood up when I walked in and started talking immediately. He said it had been going on for 6 months. 6 months of lies, of secret meetings, of them being together while I went about my life, thinking everything was fine. He said it started innocently, that Emily had come over one day when I was at work, and they just started talking, and one thing led to another, as if that made it better, as if the gradual nature of their betrayal somehow lessened the impact. He tried to tell me it didn't mean anything, that he loved me, that it was a mistake. But how do you accidentally have an affair with your wife's sister for half a year? That's not a mistake. That's a choice. Multiple choices, made over and over again, each time choosing betrayal over honesty. Each time looking me in the eye and lying about where he'd been, who he'd been with, what he was thinking about. Emily showed up about an hour later. She stood at the door crying, saying she was sorry, saying she didn't know how it happened, saying she never meant to hurt me. I let her talk because I didn't have the energy to stop her. When she finally ran out of words, I asked her one question. Did she think about me? Did she think about her sister while she was sleeping with my husband? She didn't have an answer for that. Or maybe the answer was just too painful to say out loud. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers and family drama and sleepless nights. I filed for divorce immediately. There was no part of me that wanted to try to work it out, no desire to understand or forgive or move past it. Some things can't be fixed. Some betrayals are too fundamental, too complete. My parents were devastated when they found out. My dad stopped speaking to Emily entirely. My mum tried to play peacemaker at first, saying families need to forgive, but even she couldn't find a way to justify what had happened. The hardest part wasn't even the end of my marriage. Marriages end for lots of reasons, and while it hurt, I could eventually see a path forward without Jake. The hardest part was losing my sister. We'd been close our entire lives. She was the person I called when I was happy or sad or bored or excited. She was supposed to be at my wedding, supposed to be an aunt to my future children, supposed to grow old alongside me, and now she was just gone, erased from my life by her own choices. I moved out of the house we'd shared and got a small apartment across town, started over with second-hand furniture and dishes from Target, went to therapy twice a week to try to process the grief and anger and confusion. Some days were okay. Some days I felt like I was drowning in the unfairness of it all. People would ask me how I was doing, and I'd say, fine, because what else do you say? How do you explain to someone that the two people you loved most in the world destroyed you together? Jake and Emily didn't stay together. The affair ended almost as soon as it was exposed, which somehow made it worse. They'd blown up my life for something they didn't even want to fight for. Last I heard, Jake moved to another city for work, and Emily was seeing a therapist and trying to rebuild her relationship with our parents. I don't know if that's working. We don't talk anymore. It's been 2 years now, and I'm doing better. I started dating someone new, a man who's patient and kind and understands that trust doesn't come easy for me anymore. I still think about what happened sometimes, usually late at night when I can't sleep. I think about all the times the three of us were together, family dinners and holiday celebrations, and wonder if they were already involved. Wonder if they were looking at each other across the table while I passed the mashed potatoes, completely oblivious. The betrayal fundamentally changed how I see relationships. I used to believe that love was enough, that if you cared about someone deeply enough, you'd never hurt them. Now I know that's not true. People are capable of hurting the ones they love, sometimes in the most devastating ways. It's made me more cautious, more guarded. I hate that. I hate that they took my ability to trust freely and completely, but it's the reality I live with now. Sometimes people ask if I'll ever forgive them. The honest answer is, I don't know. Forgiveness feels like something that benefits them more than me, like I'd be letting them off the hook for something unforgivable. Maybe one day I'll get there. Maybe one day the anger will fade into indifference. But right now, 2 years later, I'm still working through it, still trying to understand how the people who were supposed to love me most became the ones who hurt me worst. That story always hits different late at night, doesn't it? The quiet betrayal, the double loss, the way trust can shatter completely in a single moment. Let's move to another story about family and the complicated ways people justify their actions. This one comes from someone whose entire childhood was built on a lie. I didn't find out until I was 25 that my dad wasn't actually my biological father. 25 years of birthdays and holidays and father-daughter dances, and nobody thought to mention this fairly significant detail. The truth came out at my grandmother's funeral, of all places, in the most painful and public way imaginable. My grandmother on my dad's side passed away after a long battle with cancer. It was sad but not unexpected, and the whole family gathered for the funeral. Lots of relatives I hadn't seen in years, distant cousins and great aunts, all there to pay their respects. The service was beautiful and emotional, and afterward everyone went back to my parents' house for food and to share memories. I was in the kitchen, helping my mum set out dishes, when I overheard my Aunt Margaret talking to someone in the living room. Margaret was my dad's older sister, a woman who'd never been particularly warm to me growing up. I'd always assumed she just wasn't good with kids, but her tone made me pause and listen. She was talking to another relative, someone I didn't recognise, and she said something that made my blood run cold. She said, "Well, at least Robert did right by Karen's daughter, even though she isn't his. Gave her his name, raised her like his own. That's more than most men would do in that situation." I stood there frozen, with a casserole dish in my hands, trying to process what I'd just heard. Karen was my mother. Robert was my dad. And apparently I wasn't actually his daughter. The relative asked something quietly, and Margaret responded, "Oh no, Karen was pregnant when they met. Some guy from her past. I don't know the whole story. But Robert married her anyway and never treated that girl any different than if she was his own." My hands started shaking so badly I had to set the casserole down. My mum walked into the kitchen and saw my face, and immediately knew something was wrong. She asked what happened, and I just looked at her and asked, "Is it true?" She didn't need me to clarify what I was asking. The colour drained from her face, and she closed the kitchen door. What followed was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. My mum confirmed that yes, my dad, the man I'd called Dad for 25 years, was not my biological father. She'd been in a relationship with someone else before she met Robert, got pregnant, and that man wanted nothing to do with being a father. She met my dad when she was 3 months pregnant. They fell in love quickly, and he proposed before I was born, knowing I wasn't his biological child. They decided together never to tell me, to raise me as if Robert was my biological father in every way. I asked her why. Why would they keep this from me for my entire life? She said they thought it would be easier, that knowing the truth would only hurt me and serve no purpose. My biological father wanted no part of my life, so what good would come from telling me about him? Robert loved me, raised me, was my father in every way that mattered. She thought they were protecting me, but I didn't feel protected. I felt lied to. I felt like my entire identity had been built on a foundation of deception. Every time I'd looked in the mirror and tried to figure out which features came from which parent, I'd been operating with incomplete information. Every family tree project in school, every medical form asking about family history, all of it was based on a lie. I asked about my biological father. My mum was reluctant to tell me much. She said his name was David, that they dated for about a year before she got pregnant. that when she told him, he made it very clear he didn't want to be involved. She hadn't heard from him since, didn't know where he was or what he was doing with his life. She'd moved on, met Robert, built a new life, and never looked back. I left my parents' house that day and didn't speak to them for 3 weeks. I needed time to process, to figure out how I felt about everything I'd just learned. My dad, Robert, called me dozens of times, leaving voicemails saying he loved me, saying he was sorry I found out this way, saying nothing had changed about how he felt about me, but everything had changed for me. Not about how I felt about him necessarily, but about my understanding of who I was and where I came from. I started doing research, trying to find David. It wasn't hard in the age of social media. Within a few days, I'd found him living about 200 miles away, married with 3 kids. 3 kids he'd chosen to raise. 3 children he'd welcomed into his life, while I was the secret he'd walked away from. I looked at his Facebook photos, saw images of soccer games and birthday parties and family vacations, and felt this strange mix of anger and grief. This man had a whole life, a whole family, and I was just some ghost from his past that he'd successfully pretended never existed. I thought about reaching out to him, spent weeks drafting and deleting messages, trying to find the right words. What do you say to a biological father who never wanted you? Hi, remember that woman you got pregnant 25 years ago? Surprise, your daughter tracked you down. Eventually, I decided not to contact him. What would be the point? He'd made his choice before I was even born. Forcing myself into his life now wouldn't change the past or give me anything I needed. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my relationship with my parents, particularly with Robert. We had long conversations about why they'd made the choices they made, about how hard it had been for my mum to be pregnant and alone, about how Robert had fallen in love with both of us and never once questioned his decision to be my father. He cried when he told me that finding out I knew the truth was his worst fear, not because he was ashamed, but because he was terrified I'd think he wasn't my real dad. It took me a long time to work through my feelings about all of it. I went to therapy, joined some online support groups for people who discovered similar secrets about their parentage. I learned that my experience wasn't unique, that lots of people find out later in life about adoptions or affairs or donor situations that reshape their understanding of their identity. That helped, knowing I wasn't alone in processing this weird grief for a father I'd never had, and a truth I'd never known. 3 years have passed since that funeral. My relationship with my parents has healed, though it's different now. There's still a part of me that wishes they'd told me earlier, given me the choice to know my truth from a younger age. But I also understand they were trying to do what they thought was best. Parenting is full of impossible choices, and sometimes there are no good answers. As for David, I still think about him sometimes. Wonder if he ever thinks about me. Wonder if his wife knows about me, or if I'm still a secret he's keeping. Part of me hopes he carries some guilt about his choice, but part of me hopes he doesn't, because what good does that do anyone? He's a stranger who happens to share my DNA. Robert is my father, has always been my father, will always be my father. Biology doesn't change that. The whole experience taught me that family is more complicated than blood and genetics. It's about the people who show up, who choose to love you, who stay even when leaving would be easier. Robert chose me before I was even born. That means more than any genetic connection ever could. But I'd be lying if I said the betrayal doesn't still sting. Not from Robert, but from my mum. She looked me in the eye for 25 years and maintained a fiction about something so fundamental to my identity. Every time I called Robert Dad, every time we talked about genetics or family resemblance or medical history, she said nothing. That kind of sustained deception is its own form of betrayal, even if the motivation was protection. Late at night, that's what I think about most. Not David, not my half-siblings, but my mum's choice to keep me in the dark. The weight of carrying that secret for so many years. the calculation she must have made every time the topic came up, deciding once again to maintain the lie. I understand why she did it, but I don't know if I'll ever fully be okay with it. Stories like these remind us that families keep secrets, sometimes for decades, sometimes with good intentions, sometimes not. Either way, the truth has a way of coming out eventually, usually when you least expect it. Let's move to another story about betrayal that came from an unexpected place. This story is about trust and how quickly it can dissolve. I'm 41 years old, and I've been married to my wife Michelle for 16 years. We met in our mid-20s, got married after dating for 2 years, and built what I thought was a really solid partnership. We have 3 kids, ages 14, 11 and 8. Michelle is a stay-at-home mum, and I work as an accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown. About a year ago, I started noticing small changes in Michelle's behaviour. Nothing dramatic, just little things that seemed slightly off. She was on her phone more than usual, especially at night after the kids went to bed. She'd started going to the gym a lot, which was great, but she was also suddenly very interested in her appearance in a way that felt different. New clothes, different makeup, caring more about her hair. I remember thinking it was nice that she was taking time for herself. Stay-at-home parents often lose themselves in the chaos of raising kids, so I was happy to see her investing in her own well-being. Then there were the texts. She'd get messages and quickly flip her phone over or angle it away from me. She'd laugh at something on her screen, and when I'd ask what was funny, she'd say, "Oh, just something one of the mum friends sent," but she wouldn't show me. Started taking phone calls in other rooms. Would say it was her sister or her friend Kate, but the conversations were always brief, and she'd come back looking flushed or distracted. I didn't want to be that husband, the suspicious one who didn't trust his wife. We'd never had issues with fidelity before. Michelle had always been devoted to our family, to our marriage, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. So one night when she was in the shower, I did something I'm not proud of. I looked at her phone. She'd been texting someone named Chris. The messages were flirty, intimate, filled with inside jokes and conversations that had the easy familiarity of people who talk constantly, plans to meet up, references to previous times they'd been together, compliments about her appearance. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through weeks of messages. Months, actually. This had been going on for at least 4 months, based on what I could see. The worst part was reading her describe our life together. She'd complain about feeling like a maid and a babysitter rather than a wife, said she felt invisible in her own home, talked about how exciting it was to be with someone who really saw her. Chris would respond with understanding and validation, telling her she deserved better, asking when they could meet up again. I heard the shower turn off and quickly put the phone back where I'd found it. Sat on the edge of the bed trying to figure out what to do with this information. When Michelle came out of the bathroom in her robe, drying her hair with a towel, she looked so normal, so much like the woman I'd been married to for 16 years. It was surreal knowing that this person I thought I knew completely had been living a secret life. I confronted her that night, told her I'd seen the messages. Her face went through a series of expressions: shock, then fear, then anger, then something that looked almost like relief. She didn't deny it. She said yes. She'd been seeing someone, that it had started as just an emotional connection, someone who understood what she was going through, but it had become physical. They'd been meeting up while the kids were at school, sometimes at his place, sometimes at hotels. I asked her why. She said she felt lonely in our marriage, that we'd become roommates who happened to have kids together rather than actual partners. She said she needed to feel wanted and desired, and like she was more than just someone's mum and someone's wife. Chris made her feel that way, made her feel like herself again. I didn't yell or throw things, I just felt numb. We sat on our bed in our bedroom in the home we'd bought together 12 years ago, and talked about how our marriage had gotten to this point without me even noticing. She said she'd tried to bring up her feelings before, in smaller ways, but I was always busy with work or helping with homework or fixing something around the house. Our conversations had become logistics about whose turn it was to drive to soccer practice or what we needed from the grocery store. We'd stopped really seeing each other. Part of me wanted to kick her out right then. Part of me wanted to wake up the kids and leave. But mostly, I just felt this overwhelming sadness. 16 years together, 3 children, a whole life we'd built. And now it was all contaminated by this betrayal. Every memory I had of the past few months, every family dinner and date night and normal evening, all of it was now suspect. While I'd been living my life thinking everything was fine, she'd been living a double life. We slept in separate rooms that night. The next day, I called in sick to work and we sat down when the kids were at school to figure out what came next. Michelle said she'd ended things with Chris that morning, sent him a message saying it was over and blocked his number. She said she wanted to try to save our marriage, that the affair had been a mistake, that she loved me and our family and didn't want to throw it all away. I didn't know what I wanted. Part of me still loved her, part of me hated her, part of me wanted to work through it, and part of me knew I'd never be able to trust her again. We decided to try counselling, found a therapist who specialised in infidelity and started going twice a week. The sessions were brutal. We talked about all the ways our marriage had deteriorated without either of us really acknowledging it. How we'd stopped prioritising each other. How Michelle had felt taken for granted and how I'd felt like I was doing everything I was supposed to do, but it still wasn't enough. That was 8 months ago. We're still together, still in counselling, still trying to rebuild what was broken. Some days are better than others. Michelle has been completely transparent since that night, giving me full access to her phone and social media, telling me where she's going and who she's with. She's trying. I can see that. But the trust is gone, and I don't know if it'll ever come back. The kids don't know what happened. We decided not to tell them. They're too young to understand, and it would only hurt them to know their mum had an affair. So we put on a good face at home, act like everything's normal, have family movie nights and help with homework, and go through the motions of being a happy family. But at night, lying in bed next to her, I think about Chris and wonder what it was like. Wonder if she thinks about him. Wonder if she misses whatever they had together. The hardest part is the anger that comes in waves. I'll be fine for days, focused on moving forward, trying to rebuild, and then something will trigger it, and I'm right back in that moment of reading those text messages, seeing my wife's secret life spelled out on a screen, the intimacy she was sharing with someone else, while I was at work, while I was playing with our kids, while I was being a faithful husband. The injustice of it makes me want to scream sometimes. Michelle says she's sorry, says it constantly, says she knows what she did was wrong and she'd take it back if she could. But you can't take back betrayal. It exists now, part of our story, part of our marriage. Even if we stay together for another 16 years, this will always be the thing that happened. The time she cheated. The time our marriage almost ended. The time I had to decide if love was enough to overcome the person you love choosing to hurt you. I don't know if we'll make it. The therapist says we have a good chance if we're both committed to doing the work. Michelle seems committed. I'm trying to be. But some nights I lie awake and think about what my life could look like if I'd made a different choice. If I'd chosen to leave instead of stay. If I'd put myself first instead of thinking about the kids and the logistics and the fear of starting over at 41. People say betrayal makes you stronger, that what doesn't kill you makes you better. I don't know if that's true. Right now, it just makes me tired. Tired of being suspicious every time she's on her phone. Tired of wondering if she's really at the grocery store or if that's a lie too. Tired of trying to forgive someone who fundamentally broke the one promise that held our marriage together. But I'm still here, still trying, still hoping that maybe we can find a way back to each other. Or maybe we'll realise we can't and we'll move on separately. Either way, I know I'll never be the person I was before I read those text messages. That version of me, who trusted completely, who didn't question, who believed in the permanence of vows, he's gone. Betrayal killed him, and I'm what's left, trying to figure out how to live in this new reality. Stories like these settle in differently at night, don't they? The quiet acknowledgement that love doesn't protect you from heartbreak, that promises can be broken, that the person you trust most might be the one who hurts you deepest. Let's move to one more story before we let the night carry us away. This final story is about a different kind of betrayal, the kind that comes from people who are supposed to guide and protect you. I'm 29 years old, and I've spent the last decade trying to understand why my parents chose to destroy my childhood in the name of their own happiness. My parents got divorced when I was 16. Not unusual. Lots of families go through divorce. What made it unusual was the way they went about it and the choices they made that put me directly in the crossfire of their war with each other. Before the divorce, we were a pretty normal family. Dad worked in sales, travelled a lot for work. Mum was a nurse at the local hospital. They seemed okay together, not especially happy, but not obviously miserable either. I was an only child, and I had a decent relationship with both of them. The problem started when I overheard an argument one night. I was supposed to be asleep, but their voices carried up through the vents in my room. My mum was accusing my dad of having an affair. He was denying it, but in that way where you can tell the person is lying. Eventually he admitted it, said it had been going on for a year, that he'd met someone at a conference, that he didn't know how to end it. My mum was screaming and crying, and I just lay in my bed, listening to my family implode. They separated 2 weeks later. Dad moved out to an apartment across town, and I was supposed to split time between them. Week with Mum, week with Dad, back and forth like a tennis ball. But they couldn't even manage that without making it hell for me. Every transition was a battleground. Mum would send me to Dad's with a litany of complaints about how he'd failed as a husband and father. Dad would use his time to trash Mum, saying she'd driven him away with her nagging and her inability to let him breathe. They both tried to make me choose sides. Mum would cry and ask why I wanted to spend time with the man who destroyed our family. Dad would suggest that Mum was trying to turn me against him, that she was manipulating me. Neither of them seemed to care that I didn't want to be in the middle, that I was 16 years old and trying to deal with my own grief about our family falling apart while also being forced to play therapist to both of my parents. The really damaging stuff happened in the divorce proceedings. They fought over everything: the house, the cars, the furniture, the bank accounts, and me. I became a bargaining chip, a way for each of them to hurt the other. Dad would threaten to fight for full custody just to upset Mum. Mum would threaten to move me out of state so Dad couldn't see me. Neither of them actually wanted full custody. They both wanted to win. My mum started dating someone new about 6 months after the separation, a guy from her hospital named Tom. She moved him into our house almost immediately, this stranger suddenly sitting at our dinner table, sleeping in the bed my dad used to sleep in. I hated him, not because he was a bad person, but because he represented my mum moving on, replacing my dad like he'd never mattered. But I couldn't say that to her because she'd turn it into proof that I'd chosen Dad's side. Dad, meanwhile, married the woman he'd had the affair with, Lisa. She was younger than my mum, bubbly and friendly in a way that felt forced. She tried really hard to bond with me, asking about school and my friends, suggesting shopping trips and girls' days. But I didn't want a relationship with the woman who'd helped blow up my family. Every time I looked at her, I thought about that night I'd overheard my parents fighting, about my mum's sobs carrying through the vents, about how this woman had been part of that devastation. My parents' vindictiveness reached new heights when it came time for me to apply to colleges. I'd worked hard in school, had good grades and test scores. I wanted to go to a university about 4 hours away, a really good school with a great program for what I wanted to study. But it was expensive. I'd need help with tuition. Both of my parents had money. The divorce settlement had split their assets fairly evenly, and they were both employed and doing well. But they each refused to contribute to my education unless I cut off the other parent. Dad said he'd pay my full tuition if I agreed to stop seeing my mum and spending time at her house. Mum said she'd cover everything if I'd stop visiting Dad and his new wife. They both framed it as protecting me from the other parent's toxic influence. In reality, they were both trying to use my future as leverage in their ongoing war. I was 18 years old and trying to figure out how to pay for college, and my parents were holding my education hostage in exchange for disowning the other half of my family. The cruelty of it, the absolute selfishness, I couldn't wrap my head around it. These were the people who were supposed to love me most in the world, and they were willing to sabotage my entire future just to hurt each other. I ended up going to a cheaper state school that I could afford with loans and part-time work. I didn't tell either of my parents until after I'd enrolled. They were both furious, not because I'd struggled to pay for school, but because I'd found a way around their ultimatums. I'd refused to choose sides, and they saw that as a betrayal of them rather than an act of self-preservation on my part. My relationship with both of them deteriorated rapidly after that. I spent less and less time at either of their houses, moved into a dorm, and then an off-campus apartment, started building a life that didn't revolve around managing their feelings and navigating their dysfunction. They'd each call occasionally, usually to complain about the other, or to guilt-trip me for not being around more. I stopped answering most of the time. It's been 11 years since they got divorced. I'm 29 now, graduated from college, have a job I enjoy, and friends who feel more like family than my actual family does. I see my parents maybe once or twice a year, usually around holidays, and only for short periods. My mum is still with Tom. They got married a few years ago. My dad and Lisa got divorced after 5 years. He's dating someone else now, someone closer to his own age. Neither of them has ever apologised for how they handled the divorce, for making me the battlefield in their war with each other, for putting their own hurt and anger above my well-being. In their minds, they were each the victim, and the other parent was the villain. I was just collateral damage in their narrative. The betrayal I feel isn't about the divorce itself. Divorce happens. Sometimes marriages end, and that's okay. The betrayal is that they chose to make it as painful as possible for everyone involved, including me. They weaponized their love for me, used it as a tool to hurt each other, and in the process, they damaged my ability to trust that the people who claim to love me will actually prioritize my well-being. I went to therapy for years to work through the anger and resentment. My therapist helped me understand that their behaviour was about their own dysfunction and had nothing to do with my worth or value. But understanding something intellectually doesn't erase the emotional damage. I still struggle with relationships, with trusting people, with believing that love is real and lasting rather than conditional and temporary. Sometimes late at night, I think about what my life might have been like if my parents had handled their divorce differently, if they'd been able to put aside their hatred of each other long enough to consider how their choices were affecting me, if they'd been the adults instead of forcing me to be more mature than both of them combined. I think I'd be a different person, maybe less guarded, more willing to be vulnerable, more hopeful about family and commitment. But this is the reality I got. Parents who chose themselves over their child. Parents who let their own pain justify hurting me. And now I'm an adult trying to build a life that doesn't repeat their patterns, trying to be better than what they showed me. The sad truth is that betrayal from parents cuts the deepest because they're supposed to be the ones who never hurt you. They're supposed to be your safe place, your advocates, your protectors. When they become the source of your pain, instead, it fundamentally changes how you see the world. You learn that you can't trust anyone, not even the people who brought you into this world and promised to love you unconditionally. I'm working on forgiving them, not for their sake, but for mine. Carrying around this much anger is exhausting and it's not serving me anymore. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen or that it didn't matter. It just means letting go of the expectation that they'll ever take accountability or make it right. They won't. They're incapable of seeing their role in the damage they caused. And I have to be okay with that if I want to move forward with my life. So that's my story of betrayal. Not a spouse cheating or a friend lying. Just two parents who loved themselves more than they loved their child and couldn't see past their own hurt long enough to protect the person who needed them most. These stories have a way of settling into your thoughts as the night deepens. But we're not quite done yet. There are more tales to share, more experiences that remind us how complicated human relationships can be. Let's continue with another story about trust and the unexpected ways it can be broken. This one comes from someone who learned that friendship and love don't always protect you from jealousy. I'm 35 years old, and until 3 years ago, I had a best friend named Rachel. We'd been friends since high school, practically inseparable for over 15 years. The kind of friendship where you finish each other's sentences and know what the other is thinking without speaking. She was the sister I never had, the person I trusted with everything. Rachel and I went through all the major life milestones together. College roommates, first heartbreaks, career struggles, family dramas. She was my maid of honour when I married my husband Tom, and I was hers when she married her husband Brad 2 years later. Our husbands became friends too, so we'd have these regular double dates and weekend trips together. It felt like we'd found that rare thing where your spouse's best friend's spouse actually becomes someone you genuinely enjoy spending time with. I noticed the shift gradually. Small things that didn't quite add up, but that I dismissed because, well, she was Rachel, my best friend, the person I knew better than anyone. She started making little comments about my life that had an edge to them. When I got promoted at work, she congratulated me, but then added that it must be nice to have a boss who plays favourites. When Tom and I bought a new house, she said it was beautiful, but seemed too big for just two people, implying we were showing off. At first, I thought maybe she was going through something. Her marriage with Brad had hit some rough patches. They'd been trying to have a baby for 2 years with no success, and I knew that was weighing on her. So I tried to be understanding when she made these little digs. I figured she was processing her own disappointments, and sometimes that comes out sideways. But it got worse. She started cancelling plans with me at the last minute, but I'd see on social media that she was out with other friends. When I'd ask about it, she'd have elaborate explanations about miscommunications or how the plans had changed. She stopped returning my texts promptly, stopped calling just to chat like she used to. Our friendship, which had always been effortless, suddenly required constant effort on my part just to maintain. The real betrayal came about 6 months into this weird distance. I was having a particularly hard week at work. A big project had fallen through, and I was feeling like a failure. I called Rachel, needing to talk to my best friend, needing that support I'd always been able to count on. She didn't answer, texted back hours later saying she was busy, but we'd catch up soon. I understood. People get busy. Life happens. But then I ran into Brad at the grocery store. He mentioned that Rachel had been home all evening, that they'd had a quiet night in. No mention of being busy. No mention of any reason she couldn't have talked to me. I felt this cold realization wash over me. She'd chosen not to answer, chosen not to be there for me when I needed her, and then lied about it. I started paying more attention after that, started noticing patterns I'd been too trusting to see before. Rachel had been talking about me behind my back, not to strangers or acquaintances, but but to our mutual friends. Subtle things, carefully worded so she could deny them if confronted, but clearly designed to damage my reputation and relationships. She'd tell people I was stressed and not myself lately, planting seeds of concern. She'd share private things I'd told her in confidence, framing them as worries she had about me rather than things I'd shared in trust. She'd imply that my marriage wasn't as stable as it seemed, that Tom and I were having problems we weren't admitting to. None of it was true, but she told it all with such concern and care that people believed her. I heard about it from another friend, someone who came to me worried because of what Rachel had been saying. At first I couldn't believe it. This was Rachel, my person. Why would she do this? But as I talked to more people and pieced together the pattern, I realised she'd been systematically trying to isolate me and turn our social circle against me. The confrontation happened at a birthday party for one of our mutual friends. Rachel was there with Brad and I was there with Tom. We'd been avoiding each other for weeks, but in this setting we couldn't. I pulled her aside and asked her directly what was going on. Why was she spreading rumours about me? Why was she trying to damage my friendships? Why had she been so distant and cold? She denied everything at first, said I was being paranoid, that she'd always been supportive of me, that she didn't know what I was talking about. But I pressed her, told her I knew about the specific things she'd said to specific people, and that's when her face changed. The mask dropped, and I saw something I'd never seen before in her expression, pure resentment. She told me that I'd always had everything easy, that I'd sailed through life getting promotions and praise while she struggled, that I'd gotten married first, bought a house first, had the life she wanted while she was stuck dealing with infertility and marital problems. She said it wasn't fair that I got to be happy when she was miserable, that watching me succeed made her feel like a failure. I was stunned. All those years of friendship, and she'd been keeping score, measuring her life against mine and finding herself lacking, and instead of being happy for me or talking to me about her struggles, she decided to tear me down. I told her that if she'd come to me with any of this, if she'd been honest about her jealousy and pain, I would have been there for her. We could have worked through it together. But she'd chosen to be cruel instead. Rachel said it was too late for that the friendship was already over for her, had been over for a while. She said she couldn't be around me anymore because everything about my life reminded her of her failures. She left the party shortly after, and I haven't spoken to her since. The fallout was messy. Our mutual friends had to choose sides or try to maintain friendships with both of us separately. Brad divorced her about a year later, which I heard through the grapevine. Apparently, the problems in their marriage went deeper than I knew, and her obsession with tearing me down had been part of a larger pattern of toxic behaviour. I grieved that friendship like a death. 16 years of memories, of inside jokes and shared experiences, all poisoned by the revelation that she'd been resenting me for who knows how long. I looked back at photos from over the years and wondered when it had started. Was she already jealous when she was my maid of honour? When we went on that trip to Mexico for our 30th birthdays? When she helped me move into my first apartment after college? The hardest part was learning that people you love can hurt you out of jealousy rather than malice. Rachel didn't hate me. She hated that my life looked better than hers from the outside. She couldn't be happy for me because she was too busy being unhappy for herself. And that's a kind of betrayal that's hard to process because there's no villain. Just someone who was hurting and chose to hurt you back instead of dealing with their own pain. 3 years later, I'm doing okay. I've built stronger friendships with people who actually celebrate my successes instead of resenting them. I've learned to be more careful about who I trust with my vulnerabilities. And I've made peace with the fact that Rachel and I will never be friends again. That chapter is closed. But sometimes, late at night, I still miss her. Not the person she turned out to be, but the person I thought she was. the friend I believed I had for all those years. Jealousy is such a quiet destroyer of relationships. It doesn't announce itself with dramatic gestures. It just eats away at love and trust until there's nothing left but resentment. Let's move to another story about betrayal that came dressed up as protection. This story is about medical trust and how fragile it can be. I'm 47 years old and I've been dealing with chronic health issues for most of my adult life. Nothing life-threatening, but chronic pain and fatigue that makes everyday activities challenging. I've seen dozens of doctors over the years, tried countless treatments, and learnt to manage my limitations as best I can. 5 years ago, I started seeing a new doctor, Dr. Patricia Morrison. She came highly recommended and had great reviews online. She seemed knowledgeable and compassionate during our first appointment, listened to my history, asked good questions, seemed genuinely interested in helping me find better pain management solutions. I felt hopeful for the first time in years that maybe someone could actually help me improve my quality of life. Dr. Morrison prescribed a new medication regimen. It was more aggressive than what I'd been on before, but she assured me it was safe and that she'd monitor me closely. I trusted her. She was the expert. She had the medical degree. And honestly, I was desperate enough to try anything that might give me some relief from the constant pain I'd been living with. The medication helped initially. My pain levels decreased and I had more energy. I was able to do things I hadn't been able to do in years. Go for walks, cook meals instead of relying on takeout, actually enjoy time with my family instead of just enduring it through a fog of pain. I was so grateful to Dr. Morrison. I told everyone about her, referred friends with similar issues, left glowing reviews online. But after about 6 months, I started noticing concerning symptoms: heart palpitations, anxiety attacks, trouble sleeping. I mentioned these to Dr. Morrison at my next appointment. She said they were probably stress-related, that chronic pain patients often develop anxiety. She prescribed additional medication for the anxiety and told me to try relaxation techniques. I trusted her assessment and took the new pills. The symptoms got worse. I was having panic attacks multiple times a week. My heart would race for no apparent reason. I couldn't sleep more than 2 or 3 hours a night. I felt like I was losing my mind. But the pain was still managed, so I kept taking the medication because the alternative, going back to that level of constant pain, seemed worse than these side effects. My husband started getting worried. He suggested I see another doctor, get a second opinion. But I defended Dr. Morrison. She'd help me when no one else could. She knew my case. She was monitoring me. These were just adjustment issues, I told him. My body was still adapting to the new treatment protocol. The truth came out during a routine visit with my cardiologist for an unrelated heart murmur I'd had since childhood. He asked about my medications, and when I listed them, his face changed. He asked who had prescribed this combination, and when I told him about Dr. Morrison, he asked me to wait while he made a phone call. Apparently, the combination of medications Dr. Morrison had me on was dangerous. The pain medication and the anxiety medication she'd prescribed should never be taken together. They interacted in ways that could cause exactly the symptoms I was experiencing, plus some much more serious potential complications like seizures and heart problems. My cardiologist was shocked that any physician would prescribe this combination, especially without warning me about the risks. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I'd been taking these medications for months, trusting that my doctor knew what she was doing, and now I was finding out that she'd put me at serious risk. My cardiologist helped me schedule an emergency appointment with my primary care physician to discuss safely transitioning off these medications. He also suggested I file a complaint with the medical board. I tried calling Dr. Morrison's office to discuss what I'd learned. Left multiple messages. Finally got a call back from her nurse saying that Dr. Morrison stood by her treatment plan and that if I wasn't comfortable with it, I should find another doctor. No explanation, No acknowledgement of the dangerous drug interaction, just a dismissal. I did find another doctor, a pain management specialist, who was horrified when he reviewed my medication history. He explained that what Dr. Morrison had prescribed was not only dangerous, but also not standard of care for my condition. He said it seemed like she'd been more concerned with aggressively treating symptoms than with actually managing my underlying health issues safely. Coming off those medications was hell. Withdrawal symptoms, return of the original pain, weeks of feeling absolutely terrible as my body adjusted. But eventually I stabilised on a safer medication regimen. My new doctor was cautious and methodical, explaining every choice and every potential side effect. The kind of careful medical care I should have been getting all along. I did file a complaint with the medical board, started an investigation into Dr. Morrison's practice, and that's when I learned I wasn't the only patient she'd treated this way. Multiple complaints had been filed over the years. She had a pattern of aggressive prescribing, of combining medications in dangerous ways, of dismissing patient concerns about side effects. The medical board had investigated her before, but she'd always managed to defend her choices as within the bounds of medical judgment. My case, combined with others, finally led to sanctions. Dr. Morrison's license wasn't revoked, but she was placed on probation and required to undergo additional training on prescription safety. It wasn't enough, in my opinion, but it was something. At least other patients would be somewhat protected from her reckless prescribing. The betrayal I felt was profound. I'd trusted this woman with my health, with my body, with my life, in a very real way, and she'd been either incompetent or reckless or both. She'd caused me months of unnecessary suffering and put me at serious risk, all while presenting herself as a caring physician who was trying to help me. The gap between how she presented herself and what she actually was felt like a kind of gaslighting. She'd made me doubt my own experiences, dismiss my own symptoms, trust her judgment over my body's clear signals that something was wrong. It's been 3 years since I stopped seeing Dr. Morrison. I'm doing better now with my new doctor, though I'll never fully trust medical professionals the way I did before. I ask more questions. I research medications before taking them. I get second opinions. The naive trust is gone, replaced by a healthy skepticism that probably should have been there all along, but that I had to learn the hard way. Medical betrayal is particularly insidious because we're trained from childhood to trust doctors, to believe they have our best interests at heart, to follow their advice without question. When that trust is violated, it doesn't just affect your relationship with that one doctor. It affects how you approach all medical care going forward. Even now, starting a new medication, I feel that spike of anxiety. Is this safe? Am I being told the truth? Will this help me or hurt me? That loss of trust is its own kind of injury. People sometimes ask if I'm angry at Dr. Morrison. The honest answer is yes. I'm furious. But I'm also angry at myself for not trusting my instincts sooner. My body was screaming that something was wrong, and I ignored it, because a person with a medical degree told me to. I let someone else's supposed expertise override my own lived experience. That's a mistake I won't make again. Medical betrayal reminds us that expertise doesn't equal infallibility, that credentials don't automatically make someone trustworthy, that we have to be advocates for our own health, even when, especially when, it means questioning the experts. Let's shift to another kind of betrayal, one that happens in the workplace. This next story is about professional trust and what happens when ambition overrides loyalty. I'm 38 years old, and until 2 years ago, I had what I thought was a really solid work partnership. I'm a software developer, and I've been working at a mid-sized tech company for about 6 years. My colleague James and I had been hired around the same time, and we'd become close over the years. We'd collaborated on multiple major projects, supported each other through difficult deadlines, even socialised outside of work occasionally. James and I had complementary skills. I was stronger on the back-end architecture and he excelled at front-end design. We worked well together and our boss frequently praised our partnership as a model for the rest of the team. We'd even talked about potentially starting our own company someday, combining our talents to build something of our own. It felt like one of those rare professional relationships where mutual respect and genuine friendship coexisted. About 3 years into working together, James and I started developing a new product for the company. It was ambitious, something that could potentially revolutionise how our industry approached a particular problem. We worked on it for over a year, countless late nights and weekend sessions, refining the concept and building out the prototype. It was genuinely innovative work, and we both knew it had the potential to be huge for the company and for our careers. The betrayal happened right before we were supposed to present the finished product to the executive team. We'd been preparing for weeks, putting together the presentation, rehearsing our pitch. We were going to present it together as we'd built it together, but the morning of the presentation, I woke up with severe food poisoning. I'd eaten something bad the night before and I was in no condition to go anywhere, let alone give a major presentation. I called James from my bathroom floor, literally too sick to stand up for more than a few minutes. I told him we'd need to reschedule the presentation. He said not to worry, that he could handle it solo, and we'd both still get credit for the work. I trusted him. We were partners. We'd built this together. Of course he'd represent both of our contributions accurately. I was wrong. James gave the presentation without me, and according to everyone who was there, he presented the entire project as his own work. Didn't mention my contributions, didn't say we'd developed it as a team, just took full credit for over a year of collaborative work. When people asked where I was, he apparently said I'd been helping with some of the coding, but that the concept and the architecture were all his. I found out from my boss, who called me that afternoon to congratulate me on the successful presentation, but also to express concern that James had presented it as a solo project. My boss knew we'd been working on it together, had seen us collaborating for months, and was confused by James's presentation. That confusion turned into clarity when I explained what had actually happened. I came back to work 2 days later, still feeling weak from the food poisoning, but furious enough to push through. I confronted James immediately. He tried to play it off, saying I was misunderstanding, that he'd mentioned my contributions, that people must have misheard or misunderstood. But I had the presentation slides. He'd sent them to the executive team afterward, and I'd reviewed them. Every single slide was attributed to him alone. My name didn't appear anywhere except in the fine print at the end as part of the development team, lumped in with everyone else who'd had nothing to do with the actual design. James finally admitted that yes, he'd taken credit for the work. He said he'd seen an opportunity and taken it. The executives had loved the presentation, and there was talk of promoting him to lead a new division built around this product. He'd be making significantly more money, have a bigger title, get to build out a team. He said he was sorry, but that this was just how business worked. If I'd been there, I would have shared in the credit. But I wasn't, so he'd taken advantage of the situation. I reported what happened to HR and to my boss. There was an investigation. James maintained that we both contributed, but that he'd been the primary driver of the project. He had emails and documentation that he'd carefully crafted to support this narrative. He'd been preparing for this theft for weeks, maybe months, building a paper trail that minimised my contributions and exaggerated his own. The company's decision was crushing. They acknowledged that we'd both worked on the project, but ultimately sided with James's version of events. He got the promotion, he got to lead the new division, and I got a small bonus and a thanks for being a team player. The message was clear. James had won and I'd lost. Loyalty and partnership meant nothing compared to ambition and opportunism. I left the company 4 months later. Couldn't stand working somewhere that rewarded that kind of behaviour. couldn't stand seeing James in the halls, knowing he'd stolen from me and gotten away with it. My career took a hit because I left without another position lined up, but staying felt like betraying myself in a different way. The worst part wasn't even the professional setback. It was losing someone I'd considered a friend. We'd grabbed beers after work, talked about our lives, supported each other through personal struggles, or at least I thought we had. Looking back, I wonder if James had ever seen me as anything more than a resource to be used when beneficial and discarded when convenient. I'm at a different company now, doing well, working with people who seem more trustworthy. But I'm more guarded than I used to be. I document everything. I make sure my contributions are visible and attributed. I don't develop close friendships at work anymore because I learned that professional relationships are built on self-interest more than genuine connection. Maybe I'm being too cynical. Maybe I'm letting one betrayal poison how I see all workplace relationships. But I'd rather be protected than naive again. Workplace betrayal teaches you that not everyone who smiles at you is your friend. That collaboration doesn't guarantee loyalty. That when it comes down to career advancement and personal gain, some people will sacrifice relationships without a second thought. It's a harsh lesson, but an important one. These stories keep unfolding, each one a reminder of the different ways trust can be broken. Let's move to one more, a story about a different kind of family betrayal. This story comes from someone who learned that inheritance brings out the worst in people. I'm 51 years old, and 3 years ago my father passed away after a long battle with Alzheimer's. It was a difficult death, watching him slowly lose himself over the course of several years. By the end, he didn't recognise any of us. But before the disease took too much of his mind, he had been very clear about his wishes for his estate. My father was a successful businessman who'd built a comfortable life for our family. He wasn't wealthy by any means, but he'd accumulated some assets over his lifetime. A house that was paid off, some investments, a decent life insurance policy. He had 3 children, me, my younger brother Mark, and my younger sister Jennifer. We'd all had good relationships with him growing up, or so I thought. About 5 years before he died, when he was first diagnosed with Alzheimer's, my father sat down with me and explained his estate planning. He wanted to be transparent about his wishes before the disease progressed too far. He was leaving the house to me because I lived closest and had been most involved in caring for our mother before she passed away 10 years earlier. The investments and life insurance would be split equally between all 3 of us. It seemed fair and straightforward. He'd also appointed me as the executor of his estate, which I accepted even though I knew it would be a lot of work. But he trusted me to handle things properly, and I wanted to honour that trust. He had everything documented legally, met with his lawyer while he was still mentally competent, made sure all the paperwork was in order. I thought that would prevent any disputes later on. I was wrong. The day after my father's funeral, before we'd even finished mourning, Mark and Jennifer approached me with concerns about the will. They said it wasn't fair that I was getting the house, that the total value of what I was inheriting was more than what they were getting. They wanted me to sell the house and split the proceeds 3 ways, or buy them out of their theoretical share. I explained that this had been Dad's wish, that he'd been clear about his reasoning, that everything had been legally documented when he was of sound mind, but they weren't interested in what Dad had wanted. They were focused on what they felt entitled to. Mark said he needed the money more than I did because he had credit card debt. Jennifer said it wasn't fair that I got the house just because I lived closer. The situation got uglier from there. They contested the will, hired a lawyer, tried to argue that our father hadn't been mentally competent when he'd made these decisions. Never mind that the diagnosis had come after the will was created. Never mind that multiple witnesses, including his doctor and his lawyer, could attest to his mental state at the time. They were determined to overturn his wishes in pursuit of money. The legal battle lasted over a year. It was expensive, emotionally draining, and completely contrary to what our father would have wanted. He'd specifically planned his estate to avoid family conflict, made his wishes crystal clear, and my siblings were tearing apart what was left of our family in their greed. During the proceedings, I learnt things about Mark and Jennifer that I'd never known. Mark had been asking Dad for money constantly in the years before his death, loans he never paid back, handouts for various schemes that never panned out. Jennifer had been pressuring Dad to sign over power of attorney to her, even after he'd already designated me as executor. They'd both been circling like vultures, trying to secure their financial interests while he was still alive. The worst revelation came from some emails the lawyers uncovered during discovery. Jennifer had written to Mark about how they needed to stick together against me, how I'd always been Dad's favourite, and they needed to make sure I didn't take advantage of him. She'd suggested trying to have him declared incompetent earlier so they could take control of his assets. Reading those emails, seeing how little they cared about Dad's dignity or wishes, was devastating. The court ultimately upheld the will. My father's wishes stood. But by the time it was over, the legal fees had eaten up a significant portion of the estate. The money that should have gone to all of us instead went to lawyers. My relationship with my siblings was completely destroyed. We haven't spoken since the final court date. I live in Dad's house now. It's beautiful and I'm grateful to have it. But it's also haunted by what I lost to keep it. Every room reminds me that I'm alone now. No parents, no siblings, no family left, except for my own kids. The inheritance that was supposed to honour my relationship with my father instead cost me what remained of my family. People talk about money tearing families apart, and you always think it won't happen to yours. You think your family is above that kind of pettiness, that your shared history and love will override greed. But grief and money are a toxic combination. When someone dies, they leave behind not just assets, but also unresolved feelings and long-held resentments. Sometimes those feelings matter more than blood ties or childhood bonds. The betrayal I feel toward Mark and Jennifer isn't just about the legal fight or the money. It's about what they were willing to do to our father's memory in pursuit of their own interests. He was barely in the ground before they were plotting how to overturn his wishes. They showed so little respect for him, so little care for what he'd wanted, and in the process they showed me exactly who they were beneath the sibling relationships I'd believed in my whole life. 3 years later, I still sometimes think about reaching out, wonder if enough time has passed to bridge the gap. But then I remember those emails, the things they said about Dad and about me, the way they tried to paint me as the villain for honouring our father's wishes. And I realised there's nothing to go back to. The siblings I thought I had were people I'd invented in my mind. The real Mark and Jennifer were capable of this betrayal all along. I just never wanted to see it. Inheritance battles reveal people's true priorities. When someone dies and leaves assets behind, you learn who values family and who values money. You learn who can be trusted to honour someone's wishes and who will prioritise their own wants above everything else. It's not a lesson anyone wants to learn, but sometimes it's unavoidable. And that brings us to the end of this collection of stories, tales of broken trust and shattered relationships, of people who hurt the ones who loved them, of betrayals both sudden and slow, heavy material for late night listening. But there's something about the darkness that makes it easier to sit with these difficult truths. If you're still awake, still listening, thank you for being here in this quiet space where we can examine the messier parts of human nature. These stories aren't easy, but they're real. They're experiences that actual people have lived through and somehow found the strength to share. That vulnerability, that willingness to expose pain and betrayal to strangers takes courage. And bearing witness to these stories, letting them settle in our minds as we drift towards sleep, that's a kind of respect we can pay to those experiences. The thing about betrayal stories is that they remind us that trust is both precious and fragile. That the people we love have the power to hurt us precisely because we've given them access to our most vulnerable selves. That relationships require not just love, but integrity, loyalty, the daily choice to honour the trust that's been placed in us. And when those choices aren't made, when someone decides their own wants matter more than the promises they've made, the damage radiates outward in ways that last for years. But there's another side to these stories too, the survival side. Every person who shared their betrayal story survived it. They lived through the discovery, the confrontation, the grief, the rebuilding. They found ways to move forward even when their lives had been fundamentally altered. That resilience, that capacity to heal even from deep wounds, that's worth acknowledging too. If you're dealing with your own betrayal right now, whether from a partner or a parent or a friend or a colleague, I hope these stories give you permission to feel whatever you're feeling. The anger, the sadness, the confusion, the desire for revenge, the wish that you could go back and change everything. All of it is valid. All of it is part of processing what it means when someone you trusted chooses to hurt you. And if you're fortunate enough not to be dealing with major betrayal right now, these stories are still valuable. They're reminders to be careful with the trust people place in us, to think about the choices we make and how they affect the people who care about us, to prioritise integrity over convenience, honesty over comfort, loyalty over self-interest, because we all have the capacity to be either the betrayed or the betrayer. Which one we become depends on the choices we make, when no one's looking, when it would be easier to lie, when telling the truth might cost us something we want. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, let these stories settle in your mind like sediment in water. Let them remind you that life is complicated, that people are flawed, that trust is earned through consistent action rather than pretty promises. Let them make you more careful about who you trust and more conscientious about being worthy of the trust others place in you. Thank you for spending this time with these stories, for listening to experiences that range from painful to devastating, for sitting with the discomfort of knowing that betrayal is a universal human experience. If you've made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person this content is made for. Someone willing to engage with difficult emotions, someone interested in the messy reality of human relationships, rather than sanitized versions that pretend life is simpler than it is. Consider subscribing if you want more of these late-night story sessions. There are always more tales to explore, more truths to examine, more reminders that we're all navigating this complicated experience of being human with varying degrees of success. Some of us make it through with our integrity intact. Some of us don't. The stories help us understand both possibilities. Take care of yourselves out there. Be gentle with your own hearts while also protecting them appropriately. Trust when it's earned, but don't give it away freely to anyone who asks. And remember that betrayal, as painful as it is when it happens, doesn't have to define the rest of your story. It's a chapter, sometimes a long and difficult one, but still just a chapter. There are more pages to come, more experiences to have, more opportunities to both give and receive the kind of love and loyalty that makes the risk of trust worth taking. Until next time, rest well. Let these stories fade into the background as sleep takes over, and wake up tomorrow ready to write your own story, one where you're both protected from betrayal and committed to never becoming the betrayer in someone else's tale. Good night.